Okay. I don't know who is on the other side yet, so we are going to wait a few minutes. Let's see if I can see it on my phone. Okay, here I can see a few numbers. So if there is anybody there, please type a message so I can see that you are. Debbie Pollock is there. Hello. Yes, you're on Facebook. I can see that. Very nice. Very nice to see. I get a few minutes. We have a couple of things. Look at this. I can share each other messages like this. Hi, Bonnie. Hi, Rocky. Good to see that you're connected. I have so many devices around me. You have no idea. It's so much fun. But it's a one-man orchestra. Jerome is here saying hello. You see, now I have a feature that I can show people messages directly on the screen. You're getting fancier here. Yeah, so we are going to study today a little bit about this week's Parsha, which is a combination of two, is Acharei Mot Kedoshim. And it's well, we are actually going to study a little bit. We are going to focus on just one or two topics today. Basically, because in this parsha we have some of the laws to teach us how to relate to converts, proselytes. I think that's the way the Torah describes them, or gerim in Hebrew. And from there, we are going to take it to see the evolution on the understanding of conversion to Judaism from biblical times to the way it is now, and how different movements understand it. So it's going to be interesting to see the differences from one to the other. So let's go back to the chat. Oh, Rina say hi, Rabbi Mas. Hi, Rina. Good to see that you're connected. Okay, so let's start. It's already 2 minutes after noon. So if you want to have lunch while you study, you're invited to do so. I kind of already had a snack, so I'm good to go for an hour or so. Let's see how long this takes. Could be less, maybe. I don't know. I'm still learning to teach online without having anybody talking to me. But it's an interesting thing. Okay, so let's start with this. What I'm going to do is I have a few slides that I'm going to share with you, so we can study. We can use those texts as a base for our study. Hi, Debbie. Welcome to the class. And Robert Didich is here. Good, good. Robert, I want to study a little bit. Excellent. Okay, so let me go here where I have the first slide, and this will be our first text where we can study. This is from the book of Leviticus. Okay, chapter 19, verses 33 to 34. And it says, when a proselyte dwells among you in your land, do not taunt him or her. The proselyte who dwells with you shall be like a native among you, and you shall love him like yourself. For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am Hashem, your God. Okay, so it's very clear. And actually, by the way, it's interesting the way it is describing it. It said, you should love him. It's talking about the male, because with females we're different. It's in biblical times, conversion from the female point of view was very easy. You came to the land of Israel, you marry a Jew, you were a Jew because now you belong to the family of your husband. So it's a totally different understanding. But when you're a male, it's like you bring with you your background. You don't change background just by marriage. In fact, your wife will take your background if you don't convert to Judaism. So it was kind of complicated. So that's why it specifically talks about the male person who comes to live in the land of Israel in biblical times. So this is something very specific because it is specific to a land. We don't have any instruction in the Bible on what to do with people who wants to join the Jewish people outside of the land of Israel. The whole idea of having specific laws for those people is because the only law that they had in the land was the law of the Torah. They didn't have two laws the way we have, we believe in these days, the separation between, so to speak, church and state. We have two different things, but they didn't have that. So they needed to create, the Torah brings specific laws for people who wants to join the Jewish people, but this is exclusively for the land of Israel. And this is very important. A perfect example of this, and some of you might be surprised, even though we read this every year, and I will show you the next slide and you will see what I'm talking about, is what comes from the story of Ruth. Yeah, remember the story of Ruth? When do we read that? We read it on Shavuot, the book of Ruth. And just because the book describes the story of Ruth coming to the land of Israel, and it was the time of the harvest, and Shavuot is the time of the harvest, so that's what we do. So, but there's something very interesting, because Ruth is usually understood as the perfect convert, the perfect Jew by choice. And many of the things that they are shown in the story of the book of Ruth are supposedly taken as a guideline on how to approach conversions to Judaism. But this is why I think is so interesting, the story of Ruth. Not so much for what she said, but for something else that I'm about to show you. And some of you might be surprised for this. But let's go back to the story and you will see. Okay, so remember, Ruth was Moabite, okay, and she married a Jewish guy. And then, so she was living with him, and eventually her husband died and her father-in-law died. So her mother-in-law wanted to go back to Israel because she had nothing else to do as a Jew living in Moab. She had no more business there. Her husband was gone. Her children were gone. So she wanted to go back to the land of Israel. But Ruth said, I want to go with you to the land of Israel. Okay? Now, let me read this, because Naomi, who was Ruth's mother-in-law, has actually two daughters-in-law, because she has two children. Both children died. So now Ruth and the other daughter-in-law, she wanted to go back to Israel with Naomi. And Naomi said to them, each of you go back to your mother's house. In other words, she was saying, let me go alone to Israel. You have no business there. You are Moabites. Stay here. Each of you go back to your mother's house. May Hashem show grace to you as you did to those who died unto me. I guess Ruth and her sister-in-law, they were very nice to them. May Hashem grant you security in the home of a new husband. Then she kissed them, but they began weeping aloud. They said to her, no, we want to return with you to your people. And Naomi said, go back, my daughters. Why do you want to go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that could become your husbands? Go back, my daughters. Go your way. I'm too old to have a husband. Even if I were to say, I still have hope, even if I have a husband tonight and bore sons, will you wait for them until they grow up? Will you refuse to marry just for them? No, my daughters. On your behalf, I feel very bitter that the hands of Adonai has gone out against me. Again, they wept aloud. Then Orpah, that was the other sister-in-law, kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, and she basically decided to stay in Moab. But Ruth stuck with her. She said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her God. Go back after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, don't press me to leave you, and stop following you. For wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I shall be buried. May Adonai bring terrible curses on me and worse ones as well, if anything but death separates you and me. When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. Now, this declaration, the one that Ruth said, don't press me to leave you and so forth, is usually said out loud on conversion ceremony with people who wants to become Jew by choice. Some congregations, they have public ceremonies, and that's what they say out loud as a declaration that they want to belong to the Jewish people. Why? Because Ruth said that. Now, the other thing that we learn from here is that Naomi rejected Ruth 3 times. You see, I even marked it on the text. You can see it on bold letters, the 3 rejections. So some rabbis understand that if somebody wants to join the Jewish people, they have to be rejected 3 times. If after the 3rd time they still insist that they want to join, then that's it. You have to accept them. But this is the interesting thing. We are talking about here that Ruth said this declaration to formally accept Judaism on her way to the land of Israel. But what happened before? Because she was already married to Naomi's son. So didn't she convert and said all this before that moment? It looks like she didn't. Why? Because it was not necessary to formally belong or convert to Judaism outside the land of Israel. Why would you do that? How will your life change in those days by becoming a Jew outside of the land of Israel? If you will still be bound to the law, in this case, the law of Moab. You wouldn't be able to go to the temple because there was no temple in Moab. They didn't have anything else. And then, if let's say that the family of Naomi, they were keeping kosher or Shabbat, where you can do it as well, but you didn't have to formally become a Jew to do all that. The only importance to be a Jew in those days was in the case you wanted to live in the land of Israel, because you will have a different set of rights and obligations if you were a Jew or not. So that was the point. So when Naomi was going back to the land of Israel, Ruth basically pledged her life to the new law that she was going to find once they entered to the land of Israel. Very important to understand. And this is something that I've never noticed before. The fact that this happened after the fact that Ruth was married for many years already. And she never said anything like that. At least the story doesn't tell that to us. It tells us that she had to be tested and she has to declare this only because she was going to the land of Israel. Very important and very interesting as well. Okay, so let's go now. But this is the thing. What happened after the destruction of the temple? Let me go here. You see, eventually the temple was destroyed. We lost our homeland. We started to live in the diaspora outside the land of Israel. Now, the rabbis have to figure out a method to formalize the conversion to Judaism. It wasn't just enough with living in the land of Israel, because the land of Israel and the law of the land of Israel was not an option anymore. Now, Jews were living in other lands with other laws. So what's the alternative? If somebody wants to join the Jewish people, it has to be some kind of formal process to make that happen. And all that is rabbinic creation. It's not in the Torah. The rabbis invented a new way to make that happen. So let me show you, because that is described in the Talmud. And if I can go to my slide, you will see what the rabbi said and how that has to be done. And by the way, what I'm going to show you that is in the Talmud, very little change since that time. The process is 99.9% the same. In fact, if it's something, it's longer now. It's more difficult. But you will see that it's very, very similar. Let me show you. So this is from the Talmud, Masechet Yevamot, page 47, and it will take 2 pages actually, A and B. A rabbi's taught, a person who wishes to convert at this time is told, why do you want to convert? Don't you know that the people of Israel at this time are afflicted, pushed about, swept from place to place, and tossed about, and that tribulations come upon them? You see, this is interesting. First, if somebody comes to you and he or she wants to convert to Judaism, the first thing you have to do is to scare them. Don't you know that there is anti-Semitism around? You know, right now, nobody will care about you. But if you convert to Judaism, you are going to have a target in your back. People won't ask you if you were a convert, if you're a convert and you were born a Jew. You will be a Jew for everybody, and you will be attacked the same way that we are attacked. That's the scare number one. And almost like a push number one, the way Naomi used to do with Ruth, right? So this is the first one. You scare them, saying if you become a Jew, you will be in danger. And I guess, as I mentioned, very little change from those days to these days, because we tell exactly the same to people who want to convert to Judaism. I said, do you realize that people won't ask you? And the same way, the Nazis, they didn't ask people, were you a convert? You were born a Jew? Jews were Jews, and they were attacked, and they were killed. So sometimes we feel we have the obligation to let people know that. And some people, it's amazing, they never thought about that in that way. So they have lots of things, lots to process, because there is a history behind to prove that point. But if in this case he or she answers, I know I am not worthy to be one of them, then we immediately accept him. So basically, if a person said, I know, and I know, I thought about it, I know that is dangerous or whatever, but I truly believe that Judaism is a way of life that I want to pursue. So basically, what we do is we accept the person immediately. Now, this is the interesting, immediately, but you will see what I'm talking about here. It continues, but we inform him of the punishment for not observing gleaning, forgotten sheaves, corner of the field, and tithe for the poor. Don't worry, we are going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, but let me go through this, and we further tell him the punishment for violating the mitzvot. So this is an interesting thing, because in a nutshell, gleaning, forgotten sheaves, corner of the field, and tithe for the poor are 4 things that involve your money, things that you have to contribute from your finances. So, in other words, when we say, okay, you're not afraid of anti-Semites. I get it. Welcome to Judaism. But if you become a Jew, you have to open your wallet. In other words, it's not cheap to be a Jew. And I know some of you are probably laughing now. I cannot see your face, but I can see the grin. Like somehow I can imagine it. Because nothing changed. It's expensive to be a Jew. Food is more expensive. Membership to a synagogue is expensive. You know, JNF will knock at your door. Israel Bond will try to get your money, and so forth. So, yeah, there are certain financial obligations that you have, because we are all responsible for each other. So we have to open our wallet to support Israel, to support other Jews, to support our communities, etc. Right? It's yeah. it's very interesting, very interesting. So okay, and after we tell them that it's going to be expensive to be a Jew, we tell the person the punishment for violating the mitzvot. So then we scare them by saying, be aware that up until now you could eat forbidden animal fat without being liable for a penalty of karet, excision. It was some kind of punishment, some spiritual punishment. So it basically means that your soul will be disconnected from God. Very, very interesting. You could profane Shabbat without incurring in punishment of stoning. You see, what we tell the person is, up to this day, you can go and eat a pork sandwich or cheeseburgers or whatever you want, or you can do whatever you want on Shabbat, and that's okay, because there is no prohibition in the Torah for non-Jews to do such things. So you can do whatever you want. But from the time that you become a Jew, if you keep doing that, you're going to be punished. So are you sure you want to do that? So I understand you're not afraid of anti-Semites, you don't care about your money, but now you are going to have to change your lifestyle, otherwise you're in trouble. Are you willing to change your lifestyle as well? Okay, because from now on, if you eat forbidden fat, you are liable for excision. If you profane the Shabbat, you are liable for stoning. Just as we tell him of the punishment of not observance of the mitzvot, so too we describe the reward to him. So after that, to scare the person, if the person still say, okay, I don't care, I want to keep moving forward, then you described all the benefits that you get by being a Jew. Now, it says, we are neither too lengthy with the description nor too detailed. So in other words, we teach the person a little bit, not too much, because hopefully he or she will become a Jew and it will have a lifetime of learning. So we teach them the basic, which is pretty much what we do at the Shari Zedek with our classes. We have a cycle that it goes around for 25 lessons to study the basics of Judaism. Once the people study and learn that's basics, then we believe he or she are ready to become Jewish, and then they have a lifetime to keep expanding on that. So let's continue. So we are not going to detail. If he accepts, then he is immediately circumcised. When he heals, we immerse him immediately. So this is the mikveh, right? While two scholars stand by him and inform him of some of the lighter and some of the weightier mitzvot, commandments. So again, a reminder of all the commandments. When he has completed the immersion, he is considered as a Jew in all aspects. With reference of a woman, other women position her in the water up to the neck, while two scholars stand by from outside and inform her of some of the lighter and some of the weightier mitzvot. In other words, if it's a man, when the man goes to the mikvah, the witnesses are inside the mikvah looking at him. If it's a woman, there will be the witness will be a woman. So men will not be able to see the naked body of a woman in the water. So the Beit Din, the three rabbis, will stay outside and being sure that everything is done properly. Okay? So, in other words, the last stages I mentioned, circumcision and immersion in the mikvah. So let's go to the next slide, and let me explain quickly what I mentioned before, the financial obligations that they have. And these are basically the laws in the Torah to support the poor of the land. So we have the leket, which is the gleanings, and the gleanings of the harvest, which must be left for the poor. So in other words, when you are transporting the sheaves of wheat, for example, from one place to another, there are things that they're always falling from it. You're not allowed to go back and pick it back. You have to leave it behind so poor people can go behind you collecting that for them. Then the shechi had the forgotten sheaves. So if for any reason you forgot when you were collecting all your sheaves during the harvest, you forgot one, you cannot go back to get it. You should leave it there for the poor. The peah, the corners, that means that the corner of your field, you cannot harvest them. You have to leave them untouched for the poor. So how much is a corner, how much of your land you should leave for other people? Well, this is interesting because I'm not sure about the minimum, but there is said that there is no maximum. It's one of those mitzvot that they have no limit. You can be as generous as you want to help the poor by leaving those corners for them so they can work the land to have something to eat. And then we also have, in Judaism, what's called the ma'aser ani, is the tithe for poor people. Okay, so the 10th of the crop is giving directly to the poor on the 3rd and 6th year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle. Remember that in temple times, we have the sabbatical year. It was every 7 times. It's called Shemitah. And then different things happen on every year of the 7-year cycle. In this case, we have the special tithe that is given to the poor on the 3rd and 6th year of that cycle. And we are not obligated to give the tithe anymore. We don't tithe our income in Judaism. At least it's not an obligation, even though some people still do it. That's why there are some Orthodox synagogues that they won't have membership. What they have is their congregants that they tithe their income, and that's how they support their synagogues. They are different. It's a different model. It's a more traditional one that is coming from the days that we were obligated to give the 10th of our income to the temple and to the poor. So another thing we have to learn is, because we mentioned that the males have to be circumcised. What happens if they're already circumcised? Well, the Talmud says that with respect to the convert who had been circumcised previously, Bet Shammai ruled that we must cause a few drops of covenantal blood to flow from him, but Beit Hillel disagreed. Now, this is a very interesting thing, because I don't know how much you know about Hillel and Shammai. They were 2 famous rabbis who had lots of students. In fact, when he's talking Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, he's not really talking about Hillel and Shammai. He's talking about the students and the disciples of Hillel and Shammai. They said there were 2 opinions. And these 2 schools, they were arguing all the time. But people get confused with this, because people believe that Hillel and Shammai, the person Hillel and the person Shammai, they were fighting all the time, which is absolutely not true. In fact, it says, I believe, that they had only 2 disagreements during their lifetimes. They agreed on everything else. The disagreements came from the generations after them. The disagreements came with their students. And traditionally, Beit Hillel was always right. Well, right in the rabbinic terms, right? Because what happened is, every time that it was a disagreement, they will vote. And the majority will be the opinion that they will carry on. That will be the new law. And most of the time, Beit Hillel will be taken as the right answer. But in this case, Beit Shammai is the one that we follow. So if somebody is already circumcised, we have a ceremony that is called Atafat Dam Brit. It's a drop of blood ceremony. How can I say this so I can be explicit but not gross? Basically, what you have to do is you have to take a drop of blood from the place where the foreskin used to be. Okay? It's done usually by a doctor. In Winnipeg, we usually go to Dr. Matthew Lazar, which he will do it with our candidates. And then basically he will take a piece of cotton and show the witnesses the drop of blood. And we all say out loud, Dam Berit, which means the blood of the covenant. And that's it. That replaces the formal circumcisions done by the mohel. So what happened is many people, many adults who wants to convert to Judaism, they have to get a circumcision done at the hospital. And then when that heals, we do the atafat dam, the drop of blood, with Dr. Lazar or sometimes Dr. Singer, which also trained by Lazar to do circumcision. So the two of them in Winnipeg help us to complete this process. Okay? And let's go back to the screen. I want to show you something else here. Okay, the other thing we have to study is, we talk about the circumcision, let's talk about the mikveh. Because this is something also that some of you might be surprised about the mikveh. The mikveh itself is not mentioned in the Torah. And this is a big disagreement that, for example, back the time of the temple, we'll have the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees, which eventually became the rabbis, they insist that the mikveh came all the way from biblical times. Well, there is not real proof that that's true. I believe the oldest mikveh that they were discovered was about the 1st century CE. And there is no mention in the Torah of the body of water where we'll have to immerse in order to purify ourselves. You see, in these days we have Rabbinic Judaism, that is the Judaism that we find in the synagogue, but we also have the Karaite form of Judaism that is not so well known, but it exists. And they are Jews who rejected the oral law. In other words, they don't believe in the Talmud as the word of God. And they don't have a mikveh because they believe that there is no mentioning in the Torah of anything like the mikveh. Yes, it is mentioning the purification by water, but it doesn't mention the purification by immersion in the body of water. Also, the Tanakh mentioned the sprinkling of water, but not the full immersion. So there is this disagreement. So remember, the mikveh, yes, is accepted by Rabbinic Judaism as the will of God, but it's not explicitly mentioned in the Torah. So where is this mentioned? But for the first time, at least in written form, it's coming from a midrash called Sifra, which is basically a midrash to the book of Leviticus. And it was written on the 3rd century CE. Okay, it's very interesting to have that into consideration. And they try to explain this verse of the book of Leviticus as the source to let us know that we need to have a collection of water, a body of water, to use as a mikveh. That way you cannot just take a shower or pour water over your body limb by limb. They don't believe in that, and they believe that this verse from Leviticus is the proof, because the Leviticus chapter 22 verse 6 says, unless he has washed his body in water. Okay, but it doesn't say how. But then Sifra says perhaps he should wash one limb at a time. But Scripture teaches when the sun sets, he shall be clean. You see, this is the next verse. So the Torah believes in something that is called juxtaposition. When one thing come after the other, so basically you can connect the two verses together. So what it says is, because just as the setting of the sun occurs all at once, so too in water all at once. So the rabbis connected these two verses as a proof that you have to purify all your body at once. How you do that? Well, you cannot do that unless you totally immerse yourself in a collection of water, like a pool of water, aka a mikveh. That's the source of the mikveh. And in this day, basically, we don't challenge that. We just believe that that's the way it is, right? But is it? I don't know. That's that's how we follow in these days, and it's something that we don't challenge anymore. Now, there is something interesting now that we talk about the process of conversion, and it is how this works in different Jewish movements, because as you probably know, it is not the same be converted under Orthodox law, conservative law, Reform law. There are three different understandings and three different procedures. The way it works is as follows. In Orthodox Judaism, basically what we have is a lengthy preparation to convert somebody. They do believe in the 3 times rejection mentioned in the book of Ruth. And they don't accept any conversion that they were done by non-Orthodox rabbis. And sometimes even more so, because in Israel, they don't even accept right away all the conversions made by Orthodox rabbis. Unless that you were converted to Judaism by one of the pre-approved rabbis, pre-approved by the Israeli rabbinate, of course, unless you get converted by one of those, if another Orthodox rabbi converted you, if you go to Israel, you still have to prove your case in front of the Israeli rabbinate for that conversion to be valid. They still want to know who did the conversion, how it was done, how long you studied, what's your lifestyle, and so forth. Very complicated, very complicated. And they consider, Orthodoxy considers that the only Jews are the one converted to Judaism by Orthodox rabbis, or the ones who were born to Jewish mothers. In other words, if your father is Jewish and your mother is not, for Orthodox Judaism, you are not a Jew. Very important to remember that. Now, for conservative Judaism, we also have a preparation that is usually around a year. Orthodoxy could be usually 2 years preparation, and it involves usually, how they call it, a mentor. It's not just attending classes. They will assign to you a mentor that it will pretty much supervise you, and it will be sure that you're making all the adjustments on your lifestyle and so forth. And conservative, sometimes they have a mentor, but it's more like a guide. It's not somebody who will be breathing on your neck to be sure that you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing. And classes are usually around a year. Conservative Judaism usually accept other conversions, Orthodox for sure, other conservative for sure, and some Reform, because the only conversions that conservative Jews don't accept coming from Reform are the ones who didn't perform the circumcision, or the candidate didn't go to the mikveh. We are going to talk more about that in a minute. Now, the conservative conversions are not accepted in Israel by the rabbinate, but they are accepted by the government. So you could be in a very tricky position where you would be allowed to make aliyah with a conservative conversion, and you could become an Israeli citizen, but you still won't be recognized as a Jew by the rabbinate, so they won't marry you. It's kind of crazy. So you can make an aliyah, but then once you're there, it's going to be you're going to be in an in-between status that it might not be what you're looking for. Now, for the Reform, and this is the tricky thing, because Reform is very wide the way they do the conversions. In these days, most Reform synagogues will have the same standards of the conservative conversions, which means about a year long of study. They will require circumcision, and they will require a kosher mikveh. If that happens, that conversion will more likely be accepted by all Reform and conservative synagogues. But some Reform, they believe that circumcision and mikveh are optional, so they don't enforce it on the candidate. If you get such conversion, you may be recognized as a Jew by other Reform congregations, but for sure not by conservative, and of course not by the Orthodox. Now, the other interesting difference is for Reform, you will be considered a Jew, and you won't need a conversion if your father was a Jew and your mother wasn't. So in other words, Reform is patrilineal, while conservative and Orthodox is matrilineal. It means for conservative and Orthodox to be a Jew, you need to be born from a Jewish mother or convert to Judaism with circumcision and going to the mikveh, but not for Reform. So you have cases of people in Reform congregations that they grew up as Jews because their father was a Jew and they were accepted as a Jew. But then they cannot get married, for example, in a conservative synagogue without a conversion because they are not recognized as a Jew. It's something very interesting, and that's the point where it makes it difficult sometimes making breaches between conservative and Reform Judaism. Why is that? Because at one point you will ask yourself, why do we have two different movements these days? Because I can see that the Jewish world going towards a point where all what we are going to have is Orthodox and non-Orthodox, and Orthodox and liberal. But still, within the liberal side of Judaism, we have this break in between because of this main issues: circumcision, mikveh, and patrilineal versus matrilineal. So those are the three things that the conservative and Reform movements will need to have a conversation to make some breaches, to make some agreements on those two things for some kind of unification of standards moving forward in the future. So the other thing that is interesting, going back to the original text, was the fact that we need to, the way we should treat the convert and how we have to love them, accept them, and make them feel good among us. Now, there is another verse from the book of Leviticus that is going to talk about something very similar, and it's the very famous, let me go here. The very famous, you shall not take revenge nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Hashem. The very famous love your neighbor as yourself. And this is the funny thing about this, because I talk to people, especially certain Christians, that they don't study the Old Testament, or what they call the Old Testament. We call it the Hebrew Bible because we don't have an Old Testament, because we don't have a New, right? But that honestly, they don't read it. They don't read the Old Testament. And they believe that this love your neighbor as yourself was first said by Jesus, which is not. It's coming from the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 18. Very important to know. That's the original source of that phrase, love your neighbor as yourself. So the Torah needed to specify that this thing of loving the convert is important as well, because otherwise, if we only have this verse, love your neighbor, then you could be in a situation where somebody could say, okay, define neighbor. It's neighbor also people who are not Jewish but live among us. And then the Torah said, okay, to avoid any confusion, you have to love everybody. So we'll give us examples on how it's not just your neighbor, but it's everybody living among you, even if it's an alien, even if it's somebody who was not born there and it's just living in your land. We have the obligation to love everybody. But this is the source that everybody knows, and how to love our neighbor as yourself. And when it says neighbor, is talking about everybody. But before that, and this is part of the same verse, but we don't usually talk about it, he said, you shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the son of your people. Now, what's the difference between vengeance and grudge? The Talmud spends some times discussing the difference between one and the other. Look what they say. This is the comments that Rashi made on the tractate Yoma from the Talmud, page 23a. What constitutes taking vengeance? And he gives an example. It says, for example, if he said to him, lend me your sickle, and the latter replies, no. The next day the latter says to him, lend me your axe. And he says to him, I will not lend it to you, just that you did not lend it to me. That's revenge. But what constitutes bearing a grudge? So for example, if he says to him, lend me your axe, and the latter replies, no, then the next day the latter says to him, lend me your sickle. Now, if he says to him, here it is for you, I am not like you, who did not lend it to me. This constitutes bearing a grudge, for he keeps the hatred in his heart, even though he does not take revenge. So in other words, taking revenge is an action. Bearing a grudge is a feeling. That's why they're both mentioning in the verse. So we have to be careful on how we do things to other people, but we also have to work out ways to eliminate those bad feelings from our hearts. Why? Because if we leave those feelings unattended, eventually they might become action, and you eventually are going to do something that is not good. That's why it is important to watch out our actions, but also to watch out our feelings. Even though in Judaism you cannot be punished because of your feelings, if you don't find ways to control your feelings, eventually they can become actions, and you can transgress by doing something to other people that it should not be done. So that's why this is mentioning here. In other words, if you if you behave this way and you have those kind of feelings, eventually you are not going to love your neighbor as yourself. Oops, I went too much. What is the previous? Here. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva said that the practical application of this verse is you should love your friends. It's basically this thing is one of the fundamental principles of the Torah. But now, something else that I want to mention about these commandments of loving your neighbor as yourself, that is very appropriate in these days, that you cannot love other people if you don't love yourself first. So it's not just about what you do to other people or when you feel towards other people. First, you have to understand and to be careful of what you do to yourself and what you feel about yourself. If you don't work that out first, then you cannot love other people. In other words, you cannot give what you don't have. How can you love somebody else if you don't love first yourself? You have to develop that feelings toward yourself first, and then and only then you will be able to extend that to other people. Extremely important to understand. But Rabbi Akiva says, if you don't get this, you cannot understand the rest of the Torah, because the whole Torah was built around the concept of loving your neighbor and loving yourself. That's one of the most important principles of the Torah. Now, this specific verse that we read this week is very important because it's also connected to the Sefirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. Remember, from Passover to Shavuot, we have 50 days. And we count every day from Pesach to Shavuot with a special blessing. That counting is called the counting of the Omer. Why? Because back on the time of the temple, and this is written in the Torah, the second day of Passover, people who are to bring to the temple a measure of barley. It's an offering. And then at the end of the cycle, at the end of the 50 days, people will come to the temple with an offering of bread made out of wheat. So it's the rabbis see an evolution all the way from this basic barley to the refined wheat, and it's an evolution from our animal instincts to our human instincts. So we count every day, and also because on Shavuot we receive the Torah. Pesach, we got our freedom. Shavuot, we received the Torah. So we count every day in between an expectation for that great moment of the receiving of the Torah. But I don't know if you noted, I will put the camera again so you can see what I'm talking about here. You see my beard? Even though I trimmed it. Because there is a tradition that for the first 33 days of the counting of the Omer, we don't shave. Because it's a semi-mourning period. There is some kind of sadness. Because something that happened in the past. And that's what I wanted to explain now. Because there is something that we learn, and I will show you my screen again. The Talmud says that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students. By the way, I don't know if any of you ever went to a yeshiva to study. You know what yeshiva is? It's where you go to study Talmud. It's a very interesting experience. If you ever have an opportunity to go to yeshiva to study, take it. I did it when I went to Israel. It's a fascinating thing. So when you go to yeshiva, you don't study alone, and you don't study in a classroom. The way you study is with a partner. It's called a chavruta. It's coming from the word chaver, which means friend, but this is an Aramaic word, chavruta. So you sit in front of another person, and you analyze text together, and you discuss about it. Okay? Once the yeshiva assigns a body to you to study, usually you keep the same person all along your studies. So we read here that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students. In other words, he has 24,000 students. And we have a message. Debbie said, is there one for women or only men? Yeah, for women it's called midrasha. It's not called yeshiva. So you can go to a midrasha also to study classical text. They don't study Talmud much. Usually Talmud is more for learning halakha, learning Jewish law. That's usually reserved in the traditional world for men. But in Israel, you can go to conservative and even reform yeshivas, and they accept men and women. So a good question. Thank you. So again, Rabbi Akiva had 24 students, or 24,000 students, or 12,000 pairs of students, and all of them died in one period of time because they did not conduct themselves with respect towards one another. They all died between Pesach and Shavuot, and they all died a terrible death. Okay? So, this is something, it's kind of sad. It's kind of sad because these are Rabbi Akiva students. The same one who was insistent, who was teaching everybody that the most important thing people have to learn is to love each other, right? He was the one who made it famous. He was the one who made popular that phrase, love your neighbor as yourself. And then here we have his own students died because they couldn't love each other. They were disrespectful to one another. It's a terrible thing. And they say that they all died between Pesach and Shavuot. In other words, they died during the counting of the Omer. So that's why in this time we don't shave, because we should be reflecting on the terrible consequences of not loving each other, of treating each other with disrespect. Because it happened to the students of one of the greatest scholars of all time. And in the same way, it could happen to us if we don't reflect on that. That's why we have different traditions. Number one, the no shaving, which is something that happened when we go through a loss. When somebody died, the mourners don't shave. But the other thing is, every day of the counting of the Omer, there's a tradition to study something to improve our relationship towards ourselves and towards other people. So now, the exception to this mourning period is because they say that they all died between Pesach and Shavuot. We don't know exactly when, but there is a tradition that they stopped dying on the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. So they all died within the 33 days. So on the 33rd days, which is known as Lag BaOmer, Lag is two Hebrew letters, Lamed Gimel, because in Hebrew every letter has a number. So Lamed is 30, Gimel is 3. So Lag means 33. So it's the third day of the counting of the Omer. Is when this mourning is lifted. We are not in mourning anymore. And then we can shave. So why did I trim my beard? Because the conservative movement, we have the tradition to shave or trim the beard on Yom HaAtzmaut to celebrate the independence of Israel. And that's a modern interpretation to make a statement that we accept and recognize the state of Israel. But it's very interesting what happened with Rabbi Akiva and how basically nobody is immune to this terrible thing, which is not loving other people. We can all fall into the trap of hating each other and disrespecting each other because we don't like the way people think or the way people live their lives. We don't like the lifestyles of somebody else, so we attack them. So we have to learn from this parsha and from this period of Pesach and Shavuot to be respectful to each other. And I believe in these days, at least most people already learned the lesson towards people who convert to Judaism. It's not the way it used to be, at least not in North America. And because many times there are certain discrimination towards converts. And the Talmud is very clear. Once a person converts to Judaism, it's not a convert anymore. It's a Jew. So we still, of course, we use sometimes this name of convert in the context of classroom so we can understand what we're talking about, but we should make efforts to never use that word after somebody converts to Judaism, because the person is not a convert, is a Jew, like somebody who was born a Jew. So it's very important to remember that, and very important to remember the consequences when we don't observe the mitzvah, the commandment to love each other, and how easy it is to fall into the trap of hating each other for virtually no reason. And we have a comment. Oh, Yerak says, yes, you can shave for Rosh Chodesh also. Yeah, some people do for Rosh Chodesh, and some people even shave before Shabbat to honor the Shabbat. But I don't shave for Rosh Chodesh. I just shave for Yom HaAtzmaut and then Lag BaOmer, and then that's it. Yeah, that's the thing. Okay, do you have any questions? We are wrapping up the class. So this is the time that you can use the chat to comment questions. And so I will give it a couple of minutes to see if there is any questions from all of you. Let's see. Oh, I see. Hold on. Debbie Pollack. What day of the Omer it is? Well, we are in the 21st day of the Omer. So we are going to count the next day tonight. But today is 21st, so you can make your calculations with which day it's going to be tonight, because you don't supposed to say out loud the next day of the Omer, because if you say it, you already counted it, and then you cannot say the blessing. We have another question, very interesting here. How conservatives treat Karaites? Well, most conservative people, they don't even know what Karaites are. And I took the task to research about Karaites, and I discovered many things that were amazing. For example, that everything that I learned about Karaites at the seminary was wrong. My teacher had no clue about the Karaite views on Judaism. So there is lots of ignorance about it. Now in Israel, Karaites are considered Jews by the state, but not every Orthodox rabbis recognize the Karaites as Jews, but some of them do. So I guess if a Karaite approaches a conservative synagogue to join, because it happens, there are few Karaite synagogues around the world, so it's not uncommon for Karaite Jews to join conservative synagogues, especially in the United States, and they talk to the rabbi and they are accepted as Jews. Yes, that's what I learned about it. Yeah. Thank you, Rina. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you very much. Thank you, Judy. Okay, good to know that you learned something. Very nice. Okay, we have another question here. It says, Debbie Pollock says, is the Torah portion Acharei Kedoshim always said together? No, because there are 54 portions, 54 parshiot, 54 Torah portions, which equals the maximum of Shabbatot that we can have in a leap year. So sometimes we have less than 54, so some of the parshiot get combined. So Acharei Mot and Kedoshim are one of those that in a shorter year we have to combine them together. Yeah. We have another comment. It said, one tradition I believe is Rabbi Akiva's dead seasons are a commemoration of those who died in rebellions against oppression. Yeah, that's one thing. I heard that explanation as well. It's one opinion. Yes. Okay, thank you all for attending the class. And yeah, I have to go now. Actually, I have to help my son to connect to his next class from school from home, which he goes to Greek Academy, and they are doing a great job with that. So please remember to join all our channels, because if you subscribe, you will get all the information of what we do, and you could be notified when we go live, when we upload new material to the internet. So it's great that we have all these ways to keep in touch these difficult days. And as I always say, to close my classes, the next lesson will be next Thursday, every Thursday at noon. Put it in your calendar. Okay? We are already informed through this channel. Every Thursday at noon, you have, God willing, study of the Parsha with me, so you can prepare yourself for Shabbat. So remember, as I always say at the end of my transmission, you may be isolated, but you are not alone. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye now.